Coming up, we talk the latest wave of cuts for your New Jersey Devils, which young players will have to continue developing down at the AHL, and also, are there veterans that we're overlooking on that fourth line? We dive in on the new combinations coming up next. Yes, sir. It is DPL, the Devil's Puck Luck podcast, where we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets and the Locked On Nets podcast and your New York Football Giants, for better or worse, on the One Giant podcast with Andy Mack, joined as always by the 20-plus year season ticket holder, the pulse of the Devils fan base, Mr. Danny McDonough. How are we, sir?
I'm feeling good, man. Sorry about your Giants, man. It's a sore subject, I'm sure, but That's pretty brutal.
I'm unfamiliar with the events in question. Nevertheless, we press forward with more exciting news around the Devils. Obviously, we had the last preseason game. I'm sure everybody saw it over on YouTube. Danny came in, took care of that, gave you some of the key takeaways and bullet points. And now we're moving into the next phase, which is obviously the wave of cuts. We got some young guys going down, some, I think, specific reasons why certain players were sent down as opposed to being waived. And then we'll get into the veterans here, because maybe we've been overlooking, as you can expect, when there's a lot of excitement around the young guys, you forget about maybe the additions, right? The tyrannies of the world. There's a lot of guys that we need to discuss here, and whether or not we think they'll make it, as the Devils are down to about 32 players. Still got to get there to 23, Danny. But when we take a look at Amanda Stein, as she had reported, the following players were assigned down to Utica. That was going to be Graham Clark. It was also going to be Chris Solo. We also had waivers for today on Stillman and Danny Mazul. And you mentioned you actually were talking about Mazul over on Twitter as far as where his game was and what you saw in some of those preseason matchups.
Yeah, no, listen, Mazul played pretty well. You know, he was consistent. We didn't call his name a lot. He was responsible defensively, which is what you look for. And especially in that last game against the Islanders, defense was hard to come by, but, he played really well with Colin Miller at the end of that game. I'm not sure if you caught it, Adam, because, that 15, 20 seconds with Miller basically holding the puck behind the net and Mazul just being like super aggressive in front of the net to clear the net in front of Akira. Those are the little things you want. So, we saw a lot of things from him that he's going to be a very good player in the future. Obviously, He's not ready yet, and there is a lot ahead of him when it comes to prospects. And obviously, we're going to talk about that too. Nemec, that he's basically paired with Luke Hughes. What we saw today from Amanda Stein when she posted up, those veteran rosters, so to speak, a look maybe into the home opener. So were you surprised when you saw Nemec and Luke Hughes paired there in that third pairing?
Well, we're going to talk about that because it's a pretty exciting moment for yours truly. But just before we do, one of the other guys that we mentioned, Graham Clark, getting assigned to the AHL, but Amanda Stein followed up with this direct quote from her. Graham Clark, who has been trying to make a push for a roster spot, is one of the 5 assigned to Unica today. But camp isn't just about opening night. It's also about leaving an impression for the, quote, next man up. So just when we talk about Graham Clark here briefly, he had a nice preseason for himself, had a nice camp. I don't think that him getting sent down is reflective of anything other than just the numbers crunch for the roster. He did put his best foot forward and can be looked at as a guy that could see some time at the NHL level throughout this season.
Graham Clark we had a lot of hype, right? Coming into the preseason, coming into
Or nothing if not filled with hype.
Oh, it was hype. And when we saw him actually play the preseason games, he looked a little underwhelming and a little lost at certain points, especially in the neutral zone, and more importantly in the defensive zone. And I think it was really exposed the last night against the Islanders, in that preseason game, where you saw him miss some blatant defensive assignments, leading to actually a goal, leading to a couple odd man rushes through the neutral zone for the Islanders. And it's a learning process. These kids are so young and there's so much time for them to develop. And it's good for his game to go down to Utica and to know that he can be that next man up. I think that he can't have his confidence shaken. I hope it's not shaken because I still think that what's that?
It was a James Bond reference. I don't think you quite got it.
Yeah. But I still think that he's going to make this team, at some point, over the next year or two. Yeah. He has a lot of talent. You've seen the waves of talent from him. He shot the puck a lot in a few preseason games. That split squad game too. He shot the puck a lot up in Montreal, and he had a pretty good game. So, there's a lot of positives to take away. And again, it goes back to just really honing in on your game. Know where you have to improve your game, working with the coaching staff, not just at the NHL level, but obviously now at the Utica level, the AHL level, to really figure out the things that you need to do to get to the next level.
Before we get into that practice and what could arguably be the roster as constructed going into the regular season, Akira Schmid against the Islanders, what were your takeaways there? I mean, it's a 6-5 game. It surprised everybody, the amount of goals. Obviously, Jesper Bratt, as you discussed, with the hat trick and that top line looking phenomenal. What did you see from Akira Schmid, though? Because you watched that thing wire to wire while I was pulling double duty with some Nets coverage. Anything that you took away from Akira just having a bit of a rough go in a preseason game when you have some guys that are not going to be on this starting day roster?
When you give up 5 goals on a very limited amount of shots, obviously on
You're not
paper,
going to say it was good.
no, it looks bad. But I spoke about this last night, and I was speaking about it, all day really on social media. You can't do much if you're Akira on some of those plays. The defense was so bad, and a lot of it obviously starts with our defensive core, that played last night. But most of it was on the back checking. When I watched the game again, back some highlights today, it's like you see the back checking from some of the forwards, and they did not pick up assignments at all. And you had Islanders, Barzell in front of the net. You had Lee in front of the net constantly with no pressure on them at all. And when they go tape to tape with passes, and they're in the blue right there in front of Akira, they're going to bury the puck. Any NHL team is going to bury the puck like that. So, maybe he could have had one of them, maybe the one that went off his glove he could have had. But 4 of those 5 goals, I don't take anything away from Akira for this, and this is when you just put behind, and you and I know Akira the way he is, he's going to be like, listen, I got to be better. And any goaltender is going to say that, but I don't take anything away from his stock as 1A and 1B with VTech.
You better believe it. Coming up here in a second, we'll turn our attention to those lines as we were talking about. Yeah, Nemec paired with Luke Hughes, opening day roster. Let's get into it here coming up in just 1 second. But before we do that, let's talk about our friends over at DraftKings, guys, because you know that the NFL season is back and DraftKings Sportsbook is keeping you in on all the NFL action with great offers every single game day. New customers can bet just $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. They throw down just $5 on any game each and every week, and you're going to walk away an instant winner, even if some of your bets were actually losers. And DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every single game day, every single month, every single Thursday, Sunday, Monday, Saturdays. When we get to that point, go over and check out DraftKings Sportsbook, where they have all the great action there. Football, frankly, it's just more fun when you're in on the action. So download the app now and sign up with code
THPN.
He got there. New customers can bet just $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, with code
THPN.
Thank God. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Visit www.1800gambler.net in New York. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpgt.org. Please gamble responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hills Casino and Resort, licensed partner Golden Nugget, Lake Charles. 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario, Canada. Our friends to the north. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms, and responsible gambling resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance, and eligibility and deposit restrictions, why, they do apply.
Man,
So
you do our sponsors great, man. It's the one thing that I always tell you, you're just like so perfect with it. I'm sitting there yesterday, in the post game. It's different for me, obviously, because you take care of the post games. You do it a lot across different podcasts. And I was talking to you before, and I'm like, you know what? The DraftKings one, just reading the DraftKings. I just want to make sure it's perfect, Adam, like you do it.
Yeah.
So, bravo, man.
Well, you keep working on that. Anyway, the bottom line is, if he can just get the promo code out, everything's going to be all right. Let's turn our attention. This is the good stuff here. So Amanda Steins also tweets out earlier today. We're recording this on Tuesday night, so the 3rd, the lineup for practice. And then we can squint our eyes and see this potentially being the opening night roster and setup when it comes to the offensive and defensive pairings. Nothing to talk about here with Toffoli, Hughes, and Brad on the top line. Meyer, Hischier, and Holtz remaining on that second line. We've obviously discussed Holtz at length here. Palat, Holla, and Mercer on line 3. Then we get into the Nocek, McLeod, Lazar. You can pause me and correct me on the pronunciation if you'd like, Danny. No,
It's
he's all
Nocek.
good. They don't call him the best color man in the game for nothing, my friends. Then you have
Thanks.
Tierney and Bastian as the healthy scratches in theory here to go along with Siegenthaler and Hamilton, Ball and Marino on the second pairing defensively. Oh my goodness. The third pairing is going to be Hughes and Nemec along with Smith and Miller. And then you got Vitek, you got Schmid and Kallgren, who was put on waivers with the expectation he'll make it through, obviously, to Utica. Yeah, you mentioned it there before, Danny. Hughes and Nemec together forever. Where do we stand here, man? You can lead with your reaction to it. This is Hughes now on the third defensive pairing, which maybe that
Um,
feels a little bit different on paper to start.
I think the fact that Nemec is there, I think it's a testament to the fact that Miller and Smith haven't played overwhelmingly impressive, to the coaching
That's fine.
staff.
Yeah,
Um, you know, Lindy Ruff said it himself. Luke Hughes and Nemec did not play really well at all, against the Islanders in the preseason game. We expect obviously more of those mistakes, when it comes to the younger players, and we want them to learn from those mistakes. It's going to happen. We just know it's going to happen. I think the fact that Miller and Brendan Smith early in games, it seems, in the last few preseason games have made some pretty blatant errors too and just been slow on the puck. And you don't want to be slow, especially with this Devils team, how quick we are. So now I'm like, you know what? Maybe Nemec does have a shot to make this team. I'm sticking with what I originally said. I think he's going to play in Utica for the year, Nemec, and I think
yeah.
Miller's going to get the spot, and maybe it'll be Brendan Smith, But I think one of the veteran guys is going to get the spot to play with Luke Hughes, and maybe he's paired with someone else. But I still don't see Nemec. I don't see him being on the 23-man roster. I think that it's really important to get him down to Utica and to play another full season there to get more development because he doesn't have the flashiness that Luke Hughes has right now. He's going to be a phenomenal two-way player, don't get me wrong. But Luke Hughes can make up for some of those defensive blunders with what you always talk about, being able to stick handle on the blue line, being able to be a quarterback of that power play, the second unit, maybe even the first unit. There's a lot more upside with his offensive ability that can make up for some of those turnovers on the defensive side. Whereas Nemec, I still think, needs to hone in on the entirety of his game as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, man. I mean, at least from this standpoint, we look on paper and you say that last pairing is going to be Hughes and Nemec. Like that maybe is what would jump out here. To your point, we've talked about a lot when we discuss them pairing young players with veteran experience guys. I guess in theory, like if I took this at face value, and it's just it's the practice lineup. This isn't set in stone or anything, but I don't hate the idea. Just to kind of touch on what you said there about well, has Miller or Smith really blown anybody away? And they're the veterans. So, and this is what we always talk about, always bring up is, well, the young guys have an untapped upside, right? They could take this thing to a different level. It doesn't mean that you don't want the consistency there. I'm very curious, as you are as well, with Smith and what's going to happen here because it's been a mixed bag. But maybe you look at it if you're Lindy Ruff and you say, yeah, I've got Siegenthaler and Hamilton, and I've got Ball and Marino. I've got high level consistency on my top two defensive pairings. Maybe my third pairing, I take a little bit of like a risk reward here to start potentially, knowing that if anything goes wrong, I have Smith, I have Miller. Now, the reality to me is I find it hard to think that he's going to shun both of those veterans here and then go with Nemec. That's where I think it gets a little bit tricky because as it stands, you read this roster leaving out Kallgren, you're at 24 right now. You have to get one other guy off of this sheet would have to go down, and that's where I have a little bit of pause. But I'm fine with you've heard me say this before. I'm fine with Miller being the healthy scratch. If you want to start with Nemec and see how it goes, because maybe that pairing, which you talked about the other day, being the future pairing on the defensive line there between these two players. I don't know. Why not get a sample size now, dude? Like I I love it. I love going young
No,
and giving it a shot.
no, I get it, and I see obviously the point of it, and I would not be like crazy surprised if that's what happened. But just knowing Lindy Ruff, how he kind of favors some of the veterans, you got to remember too, Miller is very new to this defensive system. It's a
He's
very
part of it.
new type of
Yeah.
team,
New camp,
playing.
young, right,
Yeah,
right.
oh, it's super different compared to where he's playing and what he's done. So I think he has a learning curve too. He's a veteran guy that's been around the league and he knows how to play hockey well. He's a defensive guy, defensive defenseman that can really, in my opinion, be able to pick up a young kid. To be able to pick up Luke Hughes. For Nemec, for me, it's what we've talked about all the time. I don't ever want him to be a healthy scratch really on this team, on the NHL team. I want him to play consistently day in, day
Let's
out.
Okay, let's touch on that as the closeout before we look on the offensive side and that final line pairing. if I told you that he's not consistently starting at the NHL, but he's playing every third game, would that be enough for you then to say, all right, that there's enough there to stay up at the NHL level, as opposed to saying, yeah, maybe every fifth game he's going to get there. You're 20 games in the season and he's only seen 40 to 50 minutes of total ice time. That, I think, is where you would draw the line. But if I can tell you that he's going to be getting 12 minutes of ice time every second or third, fourth game, would you be all right with that if you see the growth of him? Yeah. So
No.
you got a real problem on your hands. Yeah.
No, but think about it like this, right? I'd rather him play consistently in every game that he can play with the Devils if he's going to start. I want him to play and to learn through it. If not, I want him to be in Utica because I want him
Here's
to
my
get more
caveat.
games.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
that?
Here's my caveat. And I agree with you. Like, I understand your point because we talked about this with Holtz. We talked about every young player. Graham Clark is the other, good example, right? Hey, little shaky, get down to AHL. You'll be up. It's all right. Take your time. If Lindy Ruff believes that Nemec is beyond playing at the AHL level right now, but we are just congested at the NHL level, that's where I think it's okay to say you may be a healthy scratch sometimes. That's all right because there's nothing necessarily left for you to prove. And if you're working at the NHL level, even in the practices, if you're working with the other veteran experienced players, that is your learning time. That's
So
when you get,
if
that's when you continue to grow and go from there.
Yeah, if that's the case, then I'd rather him play like 3 of 4 games, and then put a Brendan Smith or Colin Miller in for 1 game, to
Hmm.
give him a rest, and then,
Sure.
go off of
Especially
that
young
basis.
player early in the season, right? A lot of
Right.
reps, a lot of, yeah.
And again, if you see, here's the thing, right? If you see, like, say that happens, like, say the first 8 games, no, the first 10 games he plays 8 games, right? And Brendan Smith or Colin Miller come in. But we see his play and Lindy Ruff and the coaching staff's like, "You know what? He wasn't ready. Let's send him back down to Utica." How is that on his confidence? How is that on his mentality as a 19-year-old kid? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. So for me, it's I don't want to even risk that now because to me, he's on the cusp. If he's on the cusp, let's send him to the AHL. If you and I are like, dude, he's absolutely incredible, it'd be a sin not to put him on the NHL squad. Then I'm sitting here with you. I'm like, listen, let's play him. What are we doing? We got to play him.
Well, and
So
here I think this is where I think would be the difference for me, just to use that. You said, for over 10 games, he starts 8. If you tell me that over the first 10 games, he starts 5, like, I think the split would be fine for me. And maybe this is the opportunity, a little bit of Smith, a little bit of Miller. Hey, what makes sense? Maybe there's a collective here of 2 veterans and a young player. Let's give him a shot. And by the way, I think you're right in the sense of, oh my God, somebody hit the button. I just said in the sense of, if you
I'm rubbing
go and
off
he
on you,
plays,
man. Rubbing
if
off.
he play, yeah, in the worst possible ways. If he played 8 out of the first 10 games, 12 out of the first 15 games, and he looked kind of shaky, and you say we're going to send him down, there is a confidence knock there. Whereas if you kind of, I think, compartmentalize it, where you go, you're playing about half of the games, you're learning, and we're kind of saying that that's what you're doing. You are learning as you go here. We know you're going to make mistakes, and that's why we're not throwing you out there for 80% of the games. We're saying let's have you build into this and still be a contributor. I think, listen, we won't belabor this point, but it does become interesting for his development. And certainly, whether he's on the NHL or at Utica on the AHL level, we're going to be watching him because he's going to be the first guy that gets called up for an opportunity, depending on how the rest of this roster shakes out.
All right.
On
So
the Yeah,
before you jump, before next point. So right now, with 2 preseason games left, okay,
that's right.
your prediction of what the defensive pairings will be and what you want them to be. So what you think and what you want. For me, it's both. It's exactly the same. For me, I want Siegs and Hamilton, Ball and Marino, and I want Luke Hughes with Miller or Smith. Whoever's playing better in there, and then the healthy scratch being either Miller or Smith, whoever's not paired on the third pairing. And I
Mhm.
want Nemec to play in the AHL because it's like I'm saying, I don't want to beat a dead horse here. It's if we were absolutely certain, like, nah, his game is way too good to send him down, I would say let's start him right away. But I'm still not. I don't think his game is where it needs to be, and he's a 19-year-old kid, and I think there's still a big learning curve.
Yeah, incredibly young, and that's the fair part about it too, right? Not everybody's going to be Luke Hughes, and you can't treat every single player that way just because I or any fan is excited about the youth. If it's me, I think that obviously I'm not going to shake up the Siegenthaler or Hamilton line. I don't want to break any news here. I'm going to keep those guys together, but I don't mind the idea. We've seen it before. Ball on the third line. I think I like maybe having Hughes up on that second line, pair him with Marino, and then you get into this push and pull, right? If it's me, I don't need to have Nemec be starting. That this is where you and I differ, right? I think I'd be okay with him being a healthy scratch. So if you tell me that it's going to be, by the way, it could be Hughes on the third line with Miller, as you said, or with Smith, but it could also be Hughes being elevated and then putting Ball onto that third line and pairing him with one of the other veterans and allowing maybe an opportunity. If Nemec gets some looks, he can be paired with Ball on the third line and have a real security blanket, as opposed to what we're seeing in practice here. That gets me excited, but I don't think we're putting Luke Hughes and Nemec out there on the ice together and saying, hey, boys, like, just try to keep an eye on what's happening on the defensive zone, right? So that's where I would stand on them. We're going to get, hey, listen, 2 more preseason games. Maybe we'll get a little more sample size here, but anytime you see these guys listed together, it just, I get excited. Now, that being the case, offensively, let's just go through this quickly. Not quickly here, but Nocek listed there with McLeod and Lazar. Let's just take a beat on Lazar. I think it's something that is very easy to overlook. Took him a little bit of time to get going here in camp. He's looked good, though. And I think it's easy to forget that with everything that it took to get him across the border and officially to the New Jersey Devils last year, we never got a chance to see him. And maybe this is finally the reality of what the Devils and what Fitzgerald thought they were going to get in this type of player.
Yeah, isn't he so quick on the puck, man? He's just like, he's flying out there. He's aggressive every shift. I don't know if you saw the highlight probably from 2 games ago where he dropped his stick and his glove and he went to the bench and he took it from Toffoli, and Toffoli's just like, I didn't think you were going to take my glove, dude. But he's that kind of player. When he's on the ice,
I'm out here working. I don't got time to mess around. You give me what I take.
Yeah, there is no 90% to Lazar's game. It's 110% every single shift that he takes. And I think that's what I like so much about him. He's obviously more talented than Cam Janssen. I know a lot of Devils fans remember Cam Janssen very well. But it's that kind of player where he's just flying on the ice. And obviously he has better stick handling. He has better offensive prowess in the sense of he's going to find the open areas better. But I was saying it last night on the post game. I thought it was going to be between Lazar and Bastian to start that fourth line in game 1. Overnight thinking about it, maybe it's Bastian and Nocek that are going to be flip-flopped, and one of them be the healthy scratch. I'm starting to think that after looking at all the preseason games in totality that Lazar's been in, I think he deserves a spot on that fourth line.
Yeah, right now I'd have to agree with it. Now we know there was some injuries around Bastian, and then all of a sudden it goes, "Hey, he'll be there. He's going to play." But listen, in the same way that I talk about, I want young guys to get an opportunity. Veterans deserve to claim their role and not have Lindy Ruff or anyone say, "Well, we need to go with the youth." You mentioned there with Nocek, so I'll put it to you the same way first here. When you look at these lines, here we go. Raise it up over the old right shoulder and pat myself on the back. Holtz looks like, whatever we think should or could be, it looks like Holtz is going to be on that second line to start the year. I don't see how you get this far into camp and continue to put him there without thinking it's because you want to see the reps. Even if Lindy Ruff is, by the way, grilling that line and saying he's not impressed with what they're doing, that's just old school mentality from Ruff, I think. Yeah, how do you see it breaking down then? Top 2 lines, Palat, Holland, Mercer's in place. Do you see it as Nocek, McLeod, Lazar? Tierney is still listed here, but are you going to hold pat with what we see at that practice session and say Bastian's the healthy scratch on the offensive side? Done?
I'm still – I want to wait for the last 2 preseason games. Nocek just played a really bad game against the Islanders. I want to see what he does in the last 2 preseason games. I go back to how he was last year, when he played with Boston. He was great on the fourth line. I still think he's a great veteran
and a deep
player.
team a year ago for Boston, not what they are now, but
yeah. And I still think he's a great veteran player. But this could be a situation for me that is game in and game out. Maybe the fourth line changes a touch. Every 2 or 3 games you're going to see Nocek come in or Bastian come in, and it could be interchangeable. I think we both agree Tierney is not going to make the 23-man roster from what we've seen. I think you and I can both agree on that. So it comes down to, will Foote or Thompson be a healthy scratch as well? Those guys, they're going to be sent through waivers, obviously, and someone could pick them up. But do you see them being dark horses on being on that fourth line from what you've seen in the preseason game so far? Or are you sticking with, what we saw on paper from Amanda Stein today with the Nocek, Lazar, and McLeod fourth line?
Yeah, I think the Bastion health piece is a part of this, right? He's been here, so I look at whether it is him or maybe Nocek loses that spot, but you just picked up Nocek, so you're not, and you picked him up. It seems like with an intention to utilize him, whether it's a healthy scratch or otherwise. So if I look at the top lines for on the offensive side, I like the way it's laid out there on paper, and then I think Bastion is your one healthy scratch on that side of the puck. Like that's it. Tierney's not going to make it, and I don't think you're going to carry another offensive player, at least not initially. And then if we flip,
Okay,
you can tell me if you agree. Yeah.
so you think there's going to be two defensive healthy scratches, not one, and then you think,
I at least initially, because
okay,
I think you're gonna let Smith play himself out of a role, right? If I think that Nemec can be up on this NHL level, then maybe that's how you start, right? And as Smith plays himself out, and if Nemec proves himself worthy of being at the NHL level, even if he's going to be more healthily scratched than Danny might prefer, then I know that I have Miller, the veteran there. I have Nemec up on the roster. Maybe Smith goes by the wayside, and then it opens up another opportunity to bring up another offensive-minded player if you need him. But I think you want to have a little bit more depth on the defensive side of the puck right now coming into the season because you know how offensively talented we are, and then you even have very offensive-minded defensemen on this roster as well.
you think Thompson or Nolan Foote will be picked up through waivers?
But I tell you, out of the two, and I know you've watched him, and we saw him when we went live to the one preseason game. Thompson's interesting, right? Like he's shown just enough where I wonder if a team around the league is going, well, he may not be enough to quite make it there for the Devils, but we could put him on our NHL roster, right? He could be on one of our lower lines very easily. So he'd be a guy that I would watch. Foote seems a little bit more in between to me about whether or not someone would look at him as being a go out and get him for what he's going to ultimately become. Where Thompson has this kind of upside to him that I think teams might like.
Yeah, I think that's what you think about too, and that's why I would lean towards the Devils having two offensive guys as healthy scratches to
Just a
start the
safeguard.
year.
So, I mean, listen, you keep an eye on it, and I don't know, maybe a dose of reality here. We watched through the preseason. We like the way these guys look in camp, but are you going to be? Let's put it this way: Thompson gets picked up, Foote gets picked up. I'm sure you'll be disappointed to some extent, but are you really going to, lose sleep over some prospects that flashed a little bit and have been in the system? But ultimately, we
No,
got a lot of guys ahead of them in the pecking order. Excuse me.
yeah, the reason, and remember we were talking about, I thought Bastion was still going to be recovering from his injury and he would start on IR. And I really thought
Yeah.
that you could have had Tycee Thompson and Nolan Foote as healthy scratches, and coming into games on the fourth line and being those two healthy scratches on the NHL level if Bastion had started on the IR. But, we see that he's going to be playing. He looks healthy enough with his
So
shoulder.
how come you would take Thompson as a healthy scratch on the offensive line, but you wouldn't take Nemec as a healthy scratch defensively?
Age and how much he's played so far.
Sure.
Thompson's been in the system for a little bit. Nolan Foote's been in the system for a little bit. So, I think that Nemec is going to be a more important player with the Devils in the future. So I really want him to get those reps in the AHL if he's playing every day compared to if he's a healthy scratch in the NHL. Because
Sure.
you can agree. You can agree that he's going to be more of a stamp on the Devils organization than Nolan Foote or Tycee Thompson. We assume,
Oh,
obviously.
of course. Right. So you're willing to, I don't mean it not negatively, like you're willing to risk, messing up the development of a Tyce Thompson along the way here, as opposed to what you're willing to risk with Nemec. That's fair, right? And by the
Yeah.
way, just to that point, this is this is actually you speaking more positively about Nemec. I think it's funny when we have these discussions because you find yourself saying, put him down in the AHL, let him get those reps. And sometimes it's like, was he saying like, he doesn't believe in this kid? No, it's just that
No.
I'd rather him comfortably develop as opposed to feel some level of pressure that could disrupt his development. And frankly, maybe we saw that with Alexander Holtz last year, right? Maybe this is something that we talked about before. You put a guy in, he gets a bad sample size, and it can kind of throw things off a little bit. Any closing thoughts you want to hit here?
No, it's exactly what you said. I think that it shows how much I'm a big fan of Nemec to put him in the AHL. And I know it's weird.
Yeah.
It's probably
You
weird
like him so
hearing
much
that,
you
but
don't want him to play. I love it.
no, I don't, because I don't think he's good enough yet to play every day at
No,
the
I know.
NHL level. You
He's
know
a
what I
kid.
mean?
He's a
It's
kid. He's a kid. I like him. And
yeah,
I'm excited for
it's
what he can be.
all right. Give me your fourth line predictions that you think will happen and fourth line predictions that you want. And we'll do this again after the last preseason game, but for right now, before the last two preseason games, who's in and who is going on waivers?
Yeah, I think Tierney's out of here, obviously. And if I
AHL, yeah.
could, to your point, if it's Foote and it's Thompson, I don't hate the idea. I loved, by the way, I like what I saw from Thompson in camp. So I don't mind him being maybe a healthy scratch to start the year. Now, what does that impact on the defensive side, as I mentioned before? We'll see. But I'm perfectly fine with keeping him up there and putting him as a healthy scratch, at least to start, making sure that Nocek, making sure that Lazar carries over this kind of energy, and then just refine it, right? Refine it once you get to the regular season. And if we follow your train of thought, Nemec isn't going to be up to start the year, then you get that flexibility because you have Smith, you have Miller, and you can make your easy choices on the offensive side. And so I follow your logic there. I think it's not a bad idea, especially if you think these guys have a potential early season impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're on the same page, I think, with that. So it's gonna be fun to see what goes down the last two preseason games. If, for instance, like the last preseason game against, or even tomorrow, they play the Rangers tomorrow. Actually,
That's
October
right.
4th. Yeah. So tomorrow, I'm curious to see what the lineup's actually going to be in. If it's going to be what we saw today on paper from Amanda Stein, it's going to be pretty awesome to see that, against the Rangers team, going into that game and to see again how Luke Hughes and Nemec actually perform, and if they stay together as a pairing for the entire game, or if we see some mixing and matching. But these last two games, maybe we'll go 7-0 right in the preseason. We'll just carry that over to the regular season.
Still a little more of a sample size to get here with veterans and young players alike. You get over to YouTube. You follow us at Devils Puck Luck. You get us on social at NJ Devils PL on Twitter. Everywhere else at Devils Puck Luck Podcast. At Danny the Face over on Twitter. At Adam Armbrecht. Until next time, guys, there's no fancy words here. Let's get after it on the ice. Let's refine this roster and get ready for the regular season.